they have technique that they know they can use to control, or there's, absolutely these guys who have, like Jocko, these military backgrounds,
Yeah.
and they
Mm-hmm.
have these skills that they can,
Yeah.
use in a
Mm-hmm.
lethal way if
Yep.
necessary.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably the last ones to ever engage or
Yeah.
For
be
sure.
aggressive, or,
Because
it's
they've
only
been
out of
through it.
necessity. Right.
Yeah.
It's, I think, very similar to, military who've been in combat. The last thing they want to do most of the time is they, have to engage in
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
anything like
for
that.
sure.
They've been there. They appreciate what it means to
Yeah.
have
Mm-hmm.
that kind of power. They appreciate what it, and value life, I think,
Right.
more so than anybody else. Military service members are law enforcement. They understand and appreciate life, be it hang in the balance
Oh, yeah.
every
Mm-hmm.
day.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're, in a similar, probably to a lesser degree, when you're in jujitsu and you're training at this level where you could be injured by a wrong move, or a choke held too long, or a twist of your hips could cause an ACL to pop.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of scenarios, you learn to appreciate your training partners and the trust that you build in and out.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So I've been able to walk into academies where I really don't
Yeah.
and feel completely,
Yeah.
you're
That's great.
still aware and cautious, but overall, it's a very welcoming community.
Yeah. Not a lot of psychopaths or whatever. You kind of
no,
get them weeded out.
Yeah, exactly. Weed it out, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually, they do get weeded out or called out
Yeah.
in the community. No community is immune
For
to
sure.
those types
For
of,
sure.
more dangerous folks that you probably don't want learning all of the
Yeah.
technique.
Mm-hmm.
But they do get weeded out. There's always the mat enforcers.
Yeah.
and
That
the
just beat the
instructors.
shit out of you or what?
Usually it's just kind of toning down.
Yeah.
I've learned over the years.
Mhm.
I think there's a very, very small population who really is to be evil, and thank goodness for
Yeah.
people who play that role of helping to protect our, our country,
Yeah.
and same kind of thing in an academy, right? You have your instructors and those folks who they watch out for the students. They make sure it's safe and they preserve the culture.
Yeah.
But you always do have, those certain people who just don't know any better yet. And
Yeah.
that's where sometimes, we joke about the mat enforcers, but a lot of times they just need to be shown.
Yeah.
And if you're, let's say, for example, a larger guy, maybe you just don't have the body control yet until you learn better jujitsu moves.
Mm.
If you don't have a lot of technique, you're naturally going to use what you have. And if you
Yeah.
have size and strength, nobody should fault you for using that on the mat.
Yeah.
Mhm. Right.
But as you continue in jiu-jitsu, you learn that you don't have to. You learn how to roll with, people who are smaller than you. You learn
Mhm.
how to handicap yourself in jiu-jitsu to reserve your strides for when you really need it and
Okay.
focus on
Mhm.
something else.
Yeah.
So it's a unique way of learning as well. I was just explaining last night to some of my training partners that when I handicap myself from my favorite techniques, I was actually in my most
Interesting.
uncomfortable position almost 8 years, and I really don't like training no-gis.
Mm.
I've just never really enjoyed it as much. But last night, Pete decided to do no-gi training. I showed up in my gi, and of course, I take my gi jacket. Training no-gi, least favorite thing to do in jiu-jitsu.
Huh?
But I left feeling happy that I
Mhm.
did it.
Mhm.
I left feeling like I added, some tools to the kit that I didn't have before. And I
Mhm.
was grateful that I did go through such an uncomfortable experience.
Would you say? Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, would you say that's because when you have the gi on, you have more to grab onto, you have more to hold?
Yeah,
Whereas if you don't have the gi, it's more like a real life scenario. You have to grab more body and less actual like clothing.
Yeah, so there's a debate in jiu-jitsu about which is more realistic.
Uh-huh.
Usually when you are in a street scenario, there's clothing involved.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so, grabbing
Maybe even a
jackets,
jacket. Or,
hoods,
yeah.
yeah, grabbing sleeves, all of that still applies.
Mm-hmm.
What's different for me about no-gi is that it just seems faster paced because you don't have those grips. when you're
Sure.
Yeah.
grappling no-gi. So there's always different viewpoints. I think there's a lot of practical application in both styles of jiu-jitsu. And I know people who say that they do the exact same thing, whether it's gi or no gi.
Yeah.
Right.
Little variations, little differences in the types of attacks. Cross collar chokes where you're using the lapel. Obviously, you don't have that same thing in no gi, but you'll have a variation to the same similar choke.
Sure.
So there's definitely two camps, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So Nicole, the first time I ever talked to her, she told me why she does jujitsu is so she doesn't have to run. And we were putting on a virtual 5K, and I'm proud to say that Nicole actually did that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And just because getting out of your comfort zone, like that's a really important thing to do.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I was so inspired by you and learning about your story. I've done some work with veterans before related to PTSD and TBI and have learned a whole lot through those experiences. And so, I was familiar with some of your story and really just inspired by how far you have progressed. And ultimately, there's a lot of different organizations also in jiu-jitsu, working with veterans, working with folks from all walks of life. But I've been inspired throughout the years working with different people who really just remind me and humble to my, my frustrations or challenges. I might say, hey, I don't like running, but you know what? I can do it. There's no reason not to run. And really, my biggest struggle with the running was always getting inside my own head. I used to run. I used to run all the time. I just happened to do it with a soccer ball at my feet.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of similar there. I'm a good runner. I can run really well. I've done triathlons. I've done stuff like that, but I don't like to.
Yeah.
I'd rather sprint. I mean, I guess if you call that running, but I mean, it's got to be like 10 seconds or less. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was a sprinter as well, and I would play outside midfield. I played in every position on the soccer field eventually, but this is just, as a child and up through high school, a little bit in college. Nowhere near a, Mia Hamm level, but I would run for 90 minutes, and it was no problem for me.
Yeah.
As long as I had a ball at my feet, or I was looking at a ball, or I was chasing down another player on the field.
Sure.
So what I've learned about myself, Shane, through this experience is really I just have to get out of my head about it, because I'll give myself, oh, my knee is uncomfortable or my a little bit tweaked, but ultimately I had no excuses for not doing it. So I've finally completed that first 5K.
That's awesome.
You can pretty much, people who know me, you can pretty much throw a charity element into anything.
Oh, that's awesome.
So,
Okay,
that gives us ideas.
There's got to be more
what's
people
next,
like
guys?
you. Yeah. So I feel like jujitsu is more of a like marathon mindset. Do you think that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
And it's also something that, man, when Echo Charles Scott has left, it was something that referenced Jocko Hands. It's the kind of thing that you really have to love it and enjoy it and just be along, without focusing on the belt, without passion.
And that's probably extremely difficult to think like that.
It might be. Yeah.
I think for some people it would. Yeah. Some people.
Well, some people. And I think eventually in jiu-jitsu, it's just grace. You embrace that grind. You embrace all of the discomfort, the fact that some days you're going to go on the mats and feel like you actually know jiu-jitsu, and other days, there are days that I sit on the mats and I'm like, I forgot jiu-jitsu. Like, I don't remember jiu-jitsu until somebody starts grappling with me, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm engaged in it. And maybe that's just me.
Yeah.
But it's something that I think you learn over time. If you stay in jiu-jitsu, if you don't end up quitting during that phase that people call the blue belt, you get to a level kind of crested that step.
Mm-hmm.
And reached up a little higher, a little higher. Well, there's always that kind of knocks you back down a little bit,
Yeah.
humbles you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reminds you that,
Mm-hmm.
okay, maybe you know this move and it works 80% of the time, but that guy, that one little defensive move, little shift
Mm-hmm.
in his angle that works. And it gives you that constant challenge. How do I make it work on the
Right.
next
Yeah.
guy? I have certain techniques that I know I can get if I'm competing in my weight class. We're about the same size, so I might feel pretty confident. Best, but
Yeah.
is it going to work against the big class? And I used to always have this guy, and I would learn a move fight at open because I wanted to see if I could still make it work against that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So you come up with unique ways.
Yeah. I think it's like kind of about setting your opponent up for a move
Mm-hmm.
that you may have done 100 times on them before, but if you set it up a little bit differently each time, you can get your opponent to fall for it.
Absolutely. Some of my favorite seminars, they might show 10 really,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll walk away with one little that allows me to date, maybe,
Yeah.
or
Mm-hmm.
gives me a different pride. And that one little detail can make a difference.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's one like I used to just go straight for it, see if I could get it or hold them and have body.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to a seminar, and I'll never call the side control position. He threw his leg over, and I was like, and when he threw the leg over the head, the person on bottom moved their arm to the fence, and when he had,
Yeah.
and it was just that baiting, those
Yeah.
little
Mm-hmm.
details, all the
Human chest, like you
Mhm.
said. Yeah.
exactly.
I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and he had GSP on, and it was right after GSP won the title from Michael Bisping, and he was talking about like the way Michael Bisping would throw punches, like he would punch GSP's lead hand and get him to go off balance, and then crack him in the face with a cross or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like that's what interests me the most about jujitsu is just like how you said you can present something a little bit differently and have a completely different result.
Mm.
That's actually a huge lesson I've learned just since coming here, but not even,
Oh yeah.
timing and approach.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually an example of how to take lessons from the math and apply them to life. It's something that, actually Pete, I've watched him from him and Brian both on math and in the work, just for certain initiatives, certain gesture time, really in how had smart growth at Origin. And actually, it's a little bit related to the story with Origin. There were so many things that I wanted guys and for the guys years ago. I kept because after I was said, guys, I do marketing. Let me do marketing. An awesome story. Help tell it.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of years, they said, "No, it's not time. We have to focus in really reviving manufacturing and bringing back the workforce." So their focus was very much focused on actual production, smart growth. Wouldn't have been smart at the time. Have so much product that we couldn't handle it.
Mm.
And so I had to learn to, be patient. I was patient, waited a couple of years. It actually took 3 years for me to convince the guys. I said, let me work
Wow.
with you. And at the time, I was doing marketing and PR at my own business, consulting for cable and insurance companies. Nobody likes those guys, right? Nobody
I
likes
don't.
their cable or insurance company.
Not
And I was
really.
doing marketing and PR and watching the story of Origin unfold. And I'm like, guys, I really, really want to work for you. How can
Yeah.
I work with you? And thank goodness, I stayed with it, stayed in touch, had kept in touch with Brian, and finally had help announcement check after Jocko Origin reached out. Jocko kind of, Pete, Jocko, the guys they ended up relationship and deal, and
And
that's when
what
it really got
what
exciting.
a great relationship they have.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, those guys